So I wanted to introduce Cheryl. She probably has a lot of cool things to say about herself, but one of the things I did want to share is I met her not so long ago. Last year, we did a group get together up in Redmond, where Microsoft was our host for the IAMCP Americas. So the chapters from around the United States, Mexico, and Canada came together for a few days. Cheryl, I think, was very instrumental in getting that organized for us and was a great host. So thank you, Cheryl, for doing that for us. One thing that Cheryl and I have talked about is going for lunch, and we've picked a couple of places. But we don't have to commit to those, Cheryl. We can pick somewhere else. And I said, well, what about Centralia? She says, well, yeah, it'll take me a while to drive there. And I said, well, I wasn't thinking about driving to Centralia from Kirkland. So I think one of your summer plans, the second or third week of June, hopefully we can squeeze you into a Cessna and we'll do a little flight over the Seattle area. So thank you for at least considering doing that with us.
Oh, yeah, I look forward to that. Thank you.
So Cheryl's going to be on the road in a couple of weeks, but she was able to squeeze this in. Just a few short weeks ago, she was in Orlando presenting to the Microsoft community of partners that represent Dynamics 365 and NAV, Business Central, and talked about this context of storytelling. And as she was sharing her thoughts of topics for today, we decided that this would be, I think, something that we all need. So please devote your direct attention to Cheryl. If you can stay off your phones and your email for a few minutes, I think you're going to find this a very useful time as you started looking at your business development plans. So Cheryl, I'll hand it over to you. And if you're able to just directly share, go ahead. If not, we'll try to work that out.
Yeah, let me give that a try. You'll have to let me know. Hopefully Teams is behaving itself. Can you see my screen?
We will in a second, I think. I think it's
all right.
Trying to change the.
Let us know when you think it's up, and then we'll let you know if we see it.
Well, I have a red box, but I am beaming to you from Washington State, so who knows?
Do we need to do anything special?
Oh, there we go. I think
it's all the graphics coming over the wire. Okay, so Cheryl, go ahead. The floor is yours.
All right, and I'm not sure if my little cameo is working, but never mind. So as I kick off this presentation, I do need to acknowledge that I worked with John Rivers, who is the Tampa president of the IAMCP, and his company marketeer, his business partner, Diane, and myself put together this deck for directions. And then I got to present with him at the IT Alliance in Vancouver, Canada the following week. Yesterday, I presented it to a number of ISVs in our community, and now it's your turn. So this will be the fourth time I've done this presentation, and every time I do it, I hear new stories. And I think just the person who preceded me in this presentation had a great story to tell about homeless youth. And those are the stories that we remember as we move forward. When we leave today, we'll always remember, oh, this is what I heard at this place. So I'm going to just quickly run through 5 topics about storytelling. I will tell a couple of stories, and then I'm going to pause between sections. It'll be your opportunities to share some of your stories. That's what makes this presentation so valuable for me is hearing the partner stories. We all come with our own backgrounds, our own experiences, and that's really what helps us resonate with our prospects. So I'm going to tell you my story as I kick off and why the stories can be so powerful. So it's a personal story. My niece, Gabriella, she's now 22. She's a chemistry student at the Imperial College in London. And she was born with a congenital defect where the lower part of her left leg, the bone never grew properly. So every time she's tried to stand as an infant, her leg would just spontaneously snap. And that went on her whole life. She went through bone grafts, fixators, transplants of stem cell tissue. Nothing worked. So at age 20, she said to my brother and his wife, she said, I'm done. I want this leg off. I'm not dealing with this any longer. So she went through a below the knee amputation and had to learn to live with a prosthetic. But at the same time, she got in touch with an organization called the Richard Whitehead Foundation in Derby, England. And this particular gentleman, Richard Whitehead, he was born without limbs and he always had prosthetics. And he partnered with Nissan Motor Corporation. And Nissan sponsored carbon blades for 4 young new amputees. And my niece was the recipient of one of those carbon blades. And so for the first time in her life, she was able to run, jump, ride a bicycle. So things that we take for granted, she could finally do. Now, what is the point of me telling you this story? Well, the next time I buy a car, I might pause. I might say, maybe I should look over there and see what Nissan's doing in this industry, and maybe I would switch. So that's not the only reason we tell stories, but that's why they can make a big impact on our businesses. And the primary reason we do that is because we are marketing people, and I know marketing to people. So everybody's kind of in love about this new thing called ChatGPT, not so new, but we see a lot of people thinking, well, I'm just going to, use this tool to generate a bunch of content. And that's very well. There is a place for tools like that in the marketplace, but we should always remember at the end of the day, we're actually marketing to people. And so make sure you keep your voice. I think that's really important. We also value connection. So especially in the world today where we're so divided, whether it's politics, community, race, geography, we've been living through 3 years and we're still living through a great virtual world. We really value connections with one another. So by telling stories, you're actually able to bring together a community where we can start to relate to one another. And one of the most powerful reasons why you would tell stories, especially in our industry where we sell pretty complex technology solutions, is that research shows that intuition plays a much larger role in complex decision making than rational thought does. It's also a way to make what you're trying to sell resonate better with your audience and have them remember what you're telling them than just sharing data with them. So we all can relate to feelings of loss, sadness, anger, happiness, etc. And appealing to the intuitive side of decision making will help you get further along in your sales efforts. Stories can also help solidify abstract concepts. So for example, if you go to the Apple website, you see a beautiful phone. Actually, I haven't been there for a while. I don't know what's on their website, but whether it's the Mac or this beautiful phone, you immediately know what it is you're buying. You're buying a phone, and do you really care about what silicon chip it's using, what the inside looks like, etc.? No, you're just looking for a phone that maybe takes great pictures, does good videos, holds, a good signal, if you FaceTime, whatever you do. And so remember that people don't really always need to know how you made the watch. They just want to know what the time is. And then stories are remembered much more than facts alone. So even though in marketing, you still need multiple touches when you're reaching out to prospects, finding a way to tell stories in those touches is really what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to pause and ask if anybody has a story that they want to share.
In the room? Yeah, at least one. Mark, you've got 100 stories. About what? Oh, maybe the context, just to double check, Cheryl, the story, is it a business story or just a?
Steve, they all play a role in what we're trying to do. So it doesn't have to be a business story, it could be about an employee, could be a personal story. And I have one I will share later that kind of brings it all home.
Well, just to prime the pump a little bit, I do have a story that I think makes some things very memorable. So it's not that long ago. My son was a Cub Scout, and some of the folks in the group I got to know on a business level, and one of them was a CFO. And he called me a couple years after we first met, so we gotten well acquainted. He says, "Steve, you'll never know what happened. You'll never believe what happened." What happened? I drove to the office this morning, and the building was gone.
Oh,
I said, "What?" The building was gone. What do you think happened? He says, "Well, we're not exactly sure, but our suspicion is that an air conditioner caught fire on the roof and burned the building down." I said, "Well, that's pretty dramatic. So what's your day looking like?" He says, "Well, the good news is all of the data that we had was hosted off-site in a data center. So at least, thank God, the electronic data is good. So my biggest problem is I've got to find office space for 100 people this week." So I said, "Okay, great. Well, thank you for sharing that. If there's anything I can do, let's talk about it." Well, I couldn't help him with real estate, but I could definitely validate that his data was good and we were able to connect to it from our systems and everything was right. So I use that story personally when I'm talking to somebody who's saying, we got servers in our closet, we got air conditioning in the building. I was, "Oh, great. Where's your data if the building burns down?" That'll never happen. Well, let me share a story that happened to a friend of mine. And this is a real story. It's not a fictitious story. So that's one that I thought might be useful for this context. Does that kind of answer what you're asking for, Cheryl?
yeah, that's perfect. And actually, you will all know that the partner community, we're like a family. Sometimes we're dysfunctional, but we all jump in ready to help one another. And at Directions, one of the partners shared a very similar story where when they came back to the office, the entire building had burnt down. And the Dynamics partners that they worked with all leapt into action to help supply, laptops and whatever they needed to get up and running within a couple of days. So, without that kind of pulled the whole community together to come to somebody's aid. So perfect example, Steve.
Okay, great. Anybody else have something I'd like to share? Mark, I knew you had at least one. Go ahead. Put it on the mic so just in case the audio works better.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hi, Mark.
Hello. So I'm going to tell a story about Directions, which was a couple of weeks ago. That good?
Yes, I would love
Okay.
it.
So we do stuff with Dynamics, and I was lucky enough to land a couple of speaking spots at Directions to talk about Microsoft CRM. And one of the sessions that I did, I'm very familiar with, was how to demo CRM. So that's kind of like my wheelhouse. It's great for Directions because it's for Business Central partners. So I get up and I show them how to demo, and I give them all the keys. The takeaway really that is, don't demo, hire me to demo it for you, right? But I give them the framework they can go off. And then I was given a couple of other session assignments, and I didn't really have a lot of feedback on it. I was kind of voluntold that I had to do a presentation. And so I had somebody come up to me because the last presentation I had was Wednesday morning, the last day of the conference at 9 a.m. And so somebody came up to me and said, "Do you get to pick your session times?" And I said, "Not only do I not get to pick my session times, I don't even get to pick my session topics," right? And so the topic that I was given by John, thank you, was Viva Sales. Does anybody know what Viva Sales is? Yeah, because I just told you about it like 10 minutes ago, right? So Viva Sales is one of the add-ons for Dynamics and actually for Salesforce that Microsoft is pushing out. It has the Copilot and the AI engine behind it, which is why Manesh and I were talking about it. And so I had been using it casually, and instead I'm now presenting on it as an expert, right? So my story is how I became an expert in Viva Sales. And the way I became an expert was I was assigned the session, and I had to get up and speak. And it's very hard to give yourself the credibility if you're not an expert on it. Like, I don't work for Microsoft. I'm an expert in Dynamics, but that piece I didn't know. So I had to learn everything about it, and then I had to present about it. So anyway, I am now the expert on Viva Sales. Thank you, Cheryl and John, for that. And that's my story.
I'm not guilty. But now I know who to ask when I have a question. Thanks.
Hey, Cheryl, this is Sanjay Dalal. How are you? I don't know if you
I'm
can
good,
see
thanks. Hi, Sanjay.
So, I mean, it says stories are remembered 22 times more, up to 22 times more. So what makes, I guess the question I have, and maybe you're about to share that on the next slide is, uh, I mean, humor works a lot. You know, when you're sharing a story, if you inject some laughter or humor, that's kind of memorable as well. So the question to you is, what makes stories memorable, and what if you really suck at storytelling? Not everybody is as fluent as Mark here, right? So there you go.
Yeah, no problem. And I hope to address that in some of my tips for how to tell stories. And there's a place for all of them. I think, none of us likes to, and in fact, my dad was just on WhatsApp this morning saying, I'm so tired of everybody being so negative. And I think that tires everybody out. But if you have negative stories to tell, and I actually do have one that I will share with you, there are ways that you can turn that around and share so people then start to resonate, because we all have those bad days in our lives. And so let's just be real. We are people. It's what you do with that makes the difference.
Cheryl, we have one more if we have time. If not, we can.
Yes.
Right
Go
into that.
ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Manish.
Actually, it's the same question what Sanjay, kind of you touched upon that. And the question is more about, the Hollywood way of creating the chaos or problem, then overcoming the problem. But when we are talking to our client, we don't have the luxury of always highlighting the grim situation. So how do you handle that? So I think you touched base on that.
Yeah, I have a slide on that a little bit later. Manish, I will try to remember to talk about that. It's in the context of a case study. I think a lot of us have clients who are like, I don't want you to do a case study on me because I don't need everybody to know what kind of horrors I have in my business. That's a very real situation. So I have some suggestions for how you might change that and turn it to your advantage. So once I do that, Manish, if you could just let me know if I answered the question or if you have anything else.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Cheryl. That's it.
You're
Here,
welcome.
back to you.
Okay. All right. So, well, what story should we tell? So let's just dive right into that. And these are some of the questions we get asked the most. How do I share my values? What do I say about my people? And let's face it, technology processes are not very sexy, but if they are too sexy, then they're probably not what you want to tell your customer. Your customer wants a very predictable outcome. He doesn't want you to muck around with his stuff. What should you say about your customers? And then what kind of formats do you tell your stories in? So we're going to go through each of those sections. And, one of the most important things to realize today is this notion of displaying your values. Today's buyer is shopping with intent. They are looking at the people they procure their solutions from to try to understand their values and whether they match their own. So whether you're promoting green solutions, trying to save on carbon emissions, you value DEI or multicultural types organizations, those are the types of things you do want to start to share on your website in some of the content you create, as well as your About Us page. And I will dive into that in a little bit more detail. When you're looking to hire new individuals, they want to know what kind of company you are. Do I really want to work with a company where I can find no information about whether employees are happy? Do they have fun? Are they valued? Does this company invest in their education? So putting that type of information on display in a public forum is really important, because I think all of us, or at least I'm getting older and crankier by the day. I do not want to spend my working hours going to work for a company where I just hate what I do. I want to enjoy what I do and come to work every day with a smile. And I'm not being corny, that is true. I just had that conversation this past week. So really understanding what it is you're trying to say about your company, and then using whatever words you might deem are important to you to describe your culture. So we have some suggestions over here, but that's by no means a conclusive list. It's unique to you. It's unique to your company and what you do. It also helps prospects understand who they want to do business with. From my lens, I work with a lot of partners, across a lot of ecosystems. And after a while, all partners start to look the same. And yes, you might have 5 modern work partners all doing teams and team security, but it's how you go about your business that prospects are really looking to understand. And how does that culture benefit not just your employees, but how does it benefit your customers? And we'll talk a little bit about process later on. And then how do you demonstrate those commitments? So, do you spend time, if you say a Microsoft partner, I'm going to use as an example, when Microsoft has their big giving day, I think it's October 1st or beginning of October, do you kind of embrace that, as a Microsoft partner and say, well, we're going to double down with that, we'll go partner with our local Microsoft office and do something with them? Or do you partner with the food bank? What is it that you do that really displays how you feel about the community in which you operate? So people, I get this one a lot because a lot of my clients will tell me, if I put my people on my website, then they're likely to get poached. And especially in today's environment where talent is hard to come by. And I think with every business, you will always have the disgruntled employee. You will have somebody who's maybe chasing money or needs to move to a different town. I think that's just life. But really thinking about, how do you show the human side of your workplace? What your Glassdoor reviews look like? What do people say about you in public forums where you might have no control over the review that you're provided? And when it comes to negative reviews, it's more how you handle that review that counts than anything else. So if you just leave it out there and make no comments, then it's just going to be like a wart right on the end of your nose. Every time you look in the mirror, you're going to see the wart on your end of the nose, and it's going to drive you crazy. So you really need to come up with a way to address, those bad reviews and address them in a way that, prospects or potential employees see how you handle those types of situations and how you navigate through tough environments. And then what do you share? So this is another one, if you're not entirely comfortable with giving a lot of detail, you might just want to share things like team pictures. This particular one, I think, was a Windows 95 launch, so kind of a throwback picture here. But one thing I want to mention is, when we're talking about our companies, you're really showcasing your employees. So they are the ones that your prospects will be working with. And it's really important that you present them in a good light. I have a couple of tips as to how you go about doing that. But the other thing you need to be really cautious of is not everybody is comfortable with being on a website, and there's some very real reasons as to why they don't want to be there. They might have an abusive partner. They might be, who knows, in the witness protection program. We don't know these things. Or they might be victims of stalkers. There's just some really good reasons. And I have had clients where they have tried to bully their employees to be on the website. It just ain't going to fly. So the one partner I do want to mention here, and it's been a while since I looked at their website actually, but when I did, they're actually a Sage partner out of Vancouver, British Columbia, called the Answer Company. And they have quite a big staff, and they had, all these tiles. You see the tiles with the picture, you click on them, they flip over a little bio and, everybody's passion, that sort of thing. But they also had a good few employees who did not want their pictures on the website. So the way they overcame that is they had a picture of the office coffee mug with the logo on it. And then those who didn't want to share their pictures, they all had coffee mugs instead of pictures. So there are ways to do it and still showcase your people and their unique talents. And when it comes to those unique talents, if we look at, how do you present your employees in a way that it resonates with prospects and customers? That's really a place where you can show their achievements, especially from a technical perspective. If they have Azure certifications or Dynamics F&O or CE or whatever it might be, we all want to know that the partners we work with have the staff that are qualified to do the implementations. So where do you start with this? Because it can be somewhat overwhelming. So I would start with, let's do the C-suite first. As the business owner, you take a first stab at it, and to try to develop some consistency with all your bios, maybe you just have 4 questions and everybody answers the same 4 questions, but use yourself as kind of the guinea pig and allow your staff to see what the outcome will be. And then they'll probably be more comfortable with sharing information about themselves. And let's get back to this old process, because process is really, really important. And as you probably all know, your company spends a lot of time sitting in front of customers, really scoping out the nature of the product, and displaying your process right up front, I think really gives prospects a way to envisage how their implementation might work. How much time are you going to spend with me to really understand my business and what I'm trying to do? How am I going to understand what I need to do to make sure this implementation is successful? And then what is going to be the outcome? Is it something pretty predictable? And then, have you done this time and time and time again? Is this a proven process? And that's where those customer stories will bear out what you're saying in terms of these process stories. And the discovery process is a great way for you to bring other individuals in your organization into the story. So I call them kind of the back office people. They are the people who don't ever want to be on camera. They just like, oh, please, I just want to sit in the back room and do my job, leave me alone kind of thing. However, involving them in the discovery process is really the opportunity to shine and display their technical knowledge. So this is a way you can bring other individuals in your organization in front of clients. And the other thing that the discovery process does is it can also outline potential gaps you might have in your solution, and also outline for the customer the gaps that they haven't thought about, which gives you the additional upsell opportunity. Okay, so now let's talk about those customer stories, because this seems to be always a big source of friction. And I'm going to argue, well, I don't have to argue with any of you, but I always say to my clients, your case studies are probably your most important sales asset, because prospects want to know that you've done this time and time again. They want to know who you've done it for. What industry was that customer in? What was the size of the organization? What was the process? What was the impact, etc. It can also go a long way to shortening your sales cycle. And it also can go a long way in bringing you referral business. I have a client who takes his case studies almost on the second call and shares it with these clients, with these prospects, because case studies are often perceived as being further down the sales funnel, but really they can be both like top, middle, and bottom. So a really important asset for you to focus on. And so hopefully here, Manish, I have some information for you as to how you handle some of, those gnarly situations. So case studies can take a long time to develop. Out of all the pieces of content we develop, they can take 6 weeks, 3 months, sometimes a year to develop. And often partners won't even start because they just know it's a difficult thing to do. First of all, you've got to get the customer's buy-in to do a case study with you, and they're not always happy to do so. You know, if you're working in industries, public sector is one, the legal industry, the medical industry is another. People don't want to admit that they had issues in their business and they really needed a new solution. But with the anonymous case study, you kind of have a much broader opportunity to talk about the issue and the problem than you would in a regular named case study. So you can be really open with discussing failures and challenges within the customer. And you can demonstrate the impact you had in that account. So what you can do too is use quotes from your own staff and then articulate the results, the before, the after, and always start with the notion that your customer will see it. Now, a couple of recommendations I would do here is before you publish that case study, make sure you share it with the customer and you say, we created this case study, we will be sharing it on our website. Your name is not in here, but I wanted to give you a heads up. And they may be really comfortable with that. Some of them may not be. And if you get to that point where they say, no, under no circumstances, then maybe you need to step away and use parts of that case study in things like webinars or emails or other parts of your marketing content. I recently had a partner client that I was talking to about case study creation, and the most recent pushback they've had is really around the realm of cybersecurity. So they didn't want to be named in any case study because they really felt that they were going to start being targeted by the hackers, knowing that they use a Microsoft stack. So just something to think about as you ask for case studies and how you choose to share them. I don't know how realistic that is, but it was a genuine concern on behalf of the customer themselves. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about fiction, and this is kind of where some of that humor and negativity can come into play. So fiction's a really great way to tell stories. As you can see, comic books, using mascots or avatars. So the most well-known ones we have are kind of the Target dog and the Geico gecko and the Energizer bunny. So you can have an avatar that, could be the face of your company that, does various things. Or you could use real life characters. So you might have somebody on your staff who's an absolute superstar, but they just don't want their face on anything. And so almost using a superhero analogy, you can still tell the story and build an adventure story based on them without actually facing up to who the individual might be. So in this way, you could also, tell your negative story if you needed to. And this is kind of where I wanted to bring up that somewhat, it's not that negative, but it's a sad story. And I heard it at Directions. Before we even kicked off this particular presentation, we invited the audience to come up and tell their stories. And this gentleman came up and he raised his hand. He said, I would like to tell my story. I'm like, okay, please go ahead. We were in tears after this. And his story, he said, my name is Ayodali, and it means joy comes home. So I am the youngest of 6 children. I have 5 older sisters, and my mother always wanted a boy. And when she went into labor, lo and behold, I was born. And so I'm the only son in the family. And that's why my name means joy comes home. So Joy, Ayodali, I won't call him Joy comes home, was growing up in North Africa somewhere. And he was abducted as a child from his family, tortured, horribly abused, and eventually found his way to the US. and he's he stood up and he said, what I learned from that, and we're all kind of horrified at this point, thinking, oh my gosh, can you even imagine what this poor man has been through? And he's like, what I learned from that was just resilience. He said, I had to learn to be resilient. And so thinking about how you can turn a very sad and negative situation into something positive is maybe that's the guy you want to showcase in your story, because all of our customers want to know that, or our clients want to know that we're going to hang into the bitter end if need be to make sure that project is successful. So they're looking for people who are resilient, who can stay the course, who can see difficult projects through. And so I just wanted to offer you that information as you think about some of the stories you might have to share within your company. So I'm going to pause a minute there and see if anybody has something they would like to share.
Anybody in the room? Anybody online have something they want to share? I think you hit us between the eyes with that last one, Cheryl.
I know, I tell you, I was like, where are my tissues? I don't know if I can present this, but, and of course, so directions was back in, was it April? And that's the one I remember. I'm like, oh my goodness, imagine having to go through that. But it just shows you the power of the story. All right, so I'll continue then, Steve.
Yes, please.
Okay, so, you know, how do we start with going about telling compelling stories? So this is going to feel like a little bit like a high school or a college refresher, this particular section. But, you know, these 5 words here, entertaining, believable, educational, organized, and memorable, that's really what we're striving for in terms of the stories that we tell. And I would encourage you to be authentic. Don't try to make up stories. I mean, there are scenarios in which you might want to make things up. I call those use cases, because use cases are really great for painting pictures for prospects as to how technology may be used. And I think there's a great fit for them. But if we're telling stories about people and situations, be as authentic as you can. So you're always looking for a protagonist, you know, whether that's a customer or an employee, articulating what the rub was, you know, where's the conflict? What was the situation? How did you resolve it? I just spoke with a partner this morning who's like, a lot of our clients are still on AS400. And I think, you know, I'm like, really? That's from the 80s, isn't it? You know, and so even talking in those contexts about, you know, really old school, and now you're modernizing this organization, you know, just how you came from here to there. I think the resolution is always very interesting. Always remember, there's a beginning, a middle, and the end. And this always reminds me of my youngest daughter. She was completing her college applications and she was sitting in my office just ranting. And she's like, Mom, this is just the dumbest thing I've ever had to do. So first of all, you have to write an introductory paragraph explaining what you're going to talk about. Then you talk about what you said you were going to do in the introductory paragraph. And then your concluding paragraph, you phrase everything you did in the introduction and the middle paragraph. That's so stupid. And so I always think about that beginning, middle, end, right? So that's the story. And then, you know, where does it take place? So for us in the technology field, you need to think about, you know, targeting specific industries. Are you targeting specific customer types? You know, who are you really trying to get the story in front of? So think about what that setting might look like. You definitely want to use visuals. As you probably know, most of us can read 2 sentences and then we get distracted and move on. So visuals can be really powerful, and that's actually where the comic strip comes in. So know your audience. Think about who you're trying to market to. Is your audience older or younger? Authenticity, I mentioned that. And then give a lot of detail. So assuming you've hooked somebody a little bit further than the first image and, you know, the first little bit of text, then the detail becomes important, because if you've hooked them there, they'll probably read more. And then try to make it useful and actionable. And then, yeah, don't use buzzwords. In fact, I was just talking this morning about, have you submitted the POE for the POC? So you guys all understand what that means because we live in a Microsoft world, right? We like to talk in acronyms. So avoid acronyms, especially, and prospects and end customers do not understand the language that we use. Don't focus so much on yourselves. Make sure that maybe your last paragraph in your story is about the great work that you do, but make sure that you're showcasing the customer. And as I mentioned, we all have warts. So, your characters can't be perfect because then they will lack authenticity. And then the other thing that we see a lot is selling your call to action too hard. And right there is my little acronym. So my CTA often is call me, book an appointment. But you need to think about prospects. I have no clue who you are. And on the first date, you're asking to marry them. Like, no, you need to think about what might the right call to action be? Download our ebook, read about our solution, blah, blah, blah. There are other ways to insert a call to action into your content. Quick pause for anybody if you have any comments before I hit the next section.
Anybody?
Does anybody need a coffee refresher?
Boy, you don't want to let us out of the room yet.
Cheryl, this is Manisha.
Yes.
Question is regarding organizing the story. We have like Steve was telling a story, then I realized, oh yeah, I had a story, but when you asked me to say, I didn't have any. And that happens most of the time because, what I think what I'm realizing is when you talk about presenting, then I start thinking about client and none of the story connects to client. It's all about me. And then I think the story is too personal to discuss in the situation. So I guess the issue maybe we need a way to gather all the story. Maybe we just cannot recall in the right time. And we never been taught in school or anywhere that you need to collect these. So when you had the organization slide, I had that question in my mind.
How to get started, you mean, or how to?
How to store, because get started, we will get started like 1 or 2 stories, and then we will not become better, is my point.
Yeah.
Well, if I could share a thought, Cheryl.
Go ahead.
I had a grandmother that told stories all the time.
Yeah.
So I was exposed to this concept as a young child. And many of us have, either by family members or friends or community members. So in my opinion, it's something you just need to practice. Find 2 or 3 things that you just like to talk about and try to wrap it in a context that may be useful to just kind of get to know somebody. Because often that's the icebreaker, is a story that maybe is relevant to the situation. I think what Cheryl's introducing here is, from a marketing message, how to package success stories, failures become success, how we endured failure. Those are a little bit more structured. But if you're just talking like off the cuff that you're in a conversation networking, I think that's practice. And,
Practice.
That's my personal opinion. I don't know, Cheryl, if you've seen anybody master this in a different way, but.
Actually, just this week, my business partner, Michelle, and I were talking about, well, how about we practice what we preach? Let's start to tell some partner stories.
Yep.
And so when I just think about the clients that we work with, I wrote down a list of 8. And for us, because you are all target customers for me, right? So think about you in mind. I'm like, okay, let me tell the story of this partner's journey with their marketing, where we started, where we took them, where we ended. And each of them is a different story. So Manish, you can even think about your customers, right? So look at your existing customers. What stories could you tell about them? And then even some of your personal stories. So the one that resonated with me back at Directions, and I don't know who this gentleman was, but when he was a teenage boy, a 13-year-old, he used to go with his father to work. And I think his father was in some kind of distribution warehouse. And he used to pick, pack, ship the nuts and bolts and whatever he had to do as his high school job. And he just happened to, as an adult, be back in the same industry. So he said his story was, every time I go into a client, I open with, oh, this is what I did when I was a 13-year-old kid. I used to go to work with my dad. I used to pick, pack, and ship the nuts and bolts. And immediately he resonated with his prospect. And so there is room for that personal story. As you think through what your stories might be, just jot them down and try them out in prospect meetings.
I think that's a great input, because even Ro, when we used to have the meeting between meeting, he would go into personal meeting stories, and we remember that more than any other thing.
Yep.
So there is a play for personal story.
And people listen to them. Yeah.
Right. And then, as Steve said about practice, maybe Steve, next meeting we should practice.
Have a little panel.
Thank you.
Storytelling panel. Great, thanks, Manish. Anyone else with a question or comment? Go ahead, Cheryl. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I'm coming towards the end, so you guys know what to expect. So just some ideas for, being a little creative in your storytelling. So this particular example, if we just think back to the big names in our industry, could be Steve Jobs being one, Apple told a lot of stories about Einstein and Picasso and Bob Dylan, people who thought differently. It's an opportunity for us to really think about the technology that we sell and how we want to stand out with our peers. Is there something you can do there with it? You can just be different. And the next example I'm going to share with you is actually a Dynamics partner out of the UK. The one on the right-hand side is an organization called Bamboom Cloud. And when they first came to us, I remember thinking, to me, it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did this. The entire website was hot pink. Like, I have never seen such a fuchsia pink website from a CPA company in my life. And I'm like, they cannot be American. Let me go find out about them. And yeah, they were from the UK. So they just went completely, I wouldn't say off the rails, completely different, right? There's like, we're not going to be known as those staid, stoic people. And then what they did eventually, so they divested themselves of the parent company, became independent. They adopted the Panda, and then they focused on the S part of the SMB market. So they sell Dynamics Business Central to the 1 to 5 user organizations, are really tiny, not a space that a lot of Dynamics partners touch. And they were tremendously successful in appealing to that audience through their visuals. And eventually they got acquired by Pax8. But a word of caution for you when it comes to this type of execution, with anything comics, avatar, or superhero related, as well as very graphical websites, you need to have a really strong graphics team behind you to follow it through everything that you do. So it's not for the faint of heart, but it's certainly a way to stand out in front of prospects. This particular example actually comes from Guinness. They're the people, the Guinness Stout. So what they did in this particular ad campaign is they showcased a group of men playing wheelchair basketball. And at the end of the ad, everybody was standing up except for one person who was the person in the wheelchair. And the whole message that they had around that, and I'm just going to read this to you, is dedication, loyalty, friendship. The choices we make reveal the true nature of our character. And the implication is it tells most viewers to be the best person they can be and drink the best quality drink they can get their hands on. So that was the subliminal message behind this particular campaign. The next example is actually an example from the Dynamics ecosystem. And those of you in Dynamics will totally relate to this one. So when you're producing cookies, it's probably not a very straightforward process. There's something that needs to happen all the way from procuring the ingredients, making sure they are stored in a temperature sensitive environment so you can bake them, package them up, ship them. They can get, they have to go through a shipping process and get to the end customer still fresh. So this was an account-based marketing campaign where the partner identified X number of accounts that he wanted to market to. And the box that the cookies were packaged in actually had the whole process and the story printed on it. And then it was shipped to their prospect customers with the tagline, "We thought you'd like to know how these cookies found you." So that was a great way to use something like a physical mailer to get the attention of somebody. And yeah, we can probably all relate to this one. So I've seen these pop up quite a lot on LinkedIn pretty recently using the polling feature, where you can have it relate specifically to your business and what you're trying to do. And this is where you could use some humor, if you want to just have some fun. People tend to interact a lot more if things are fun versus something really serious. So think about how you might use a survey or a poll to drive interaction with prospects and customers. And certainly in LinkedIn, you'll get a lot more prospects out there. And imagination. So this particular story is about my local business, which just happens to be not just Microsoft, Costco, I don't know who else is here, but Amazon. Amazon's my local business, but they are a behemoth. And so how might a small business, and we can even think about Microsoft in this context, because we're the small businesses that work with the behemoth, right? So how might we compete with somebody as big as that? And it comes down to what is the experience you're trying to drive with the product you're trying to sell. So anybody can go to Microsoft.com and buy their Office 365 or the M365 and fine, it's a transaction. But when you're working with partners, it goes much beyond the transaction. We're trying to deliver an experience for our prospects so they keep coming back to us. Unfortunately, working with Microsoft, we are the ones who then can deliver that whole experience. Whereas if you're transacting on Amazon, it's probably a lot more difficult. This particular example is from Cisco. So you probably have a question in your head, well, I don't have enough stories to build something cohesively, so how do I get started? So you probably have a variety of stories in your business. So think about, is there a theme you can use to unite all your stories? Like, how can I make my customers be the star of my campaign? And so with Cisco, they came up with a tagline, "There's never been a better time." And so within that tagline, they show the impact they're having on cities and on conservation. So that's what they did with their campaign. And my next example comes from Dassault Systems. They are the makers of 3D experience software. And this software can model, simulate, and evaluate impacts before creating any experience in the real world. So they had a project called ITER that brought together 35 countries to build the world's largest fusion device. And they needed to demonstrate the scientific and technical feasibility of fusion power as a large-scale energy source. Now, can you imagine trying to distill such a complex thing into something that the layman can understand? They had case studies, webinars, news reports, videos, everything as part of this campaign. And they came up with a theme called "Putting the Sun in a Box." And so that immediately inspires curiosity, where you think, oh my gosh, how do you put the sun in a box? And then you unpack the campaign from there. So that's what they did to really break through the noise. So this is almost my last slide now. So you almost want to start with this in mind, even though I've just told you, spent almost 50 minutes talking about telling stories. But before you start down this process, you need to figure out where am I going to put this story? Because it's going to then inform you as to what media you need to produce it in. Do you need an ebook, an infographic, an email, a series of social posts, a video? You know, how are you going about telling your stories? And each one of these items will require its own piece of media. If it's a graphics, if it's text, if it's video. So start with your distribution plan in mind and what you're trying to achieve, and then gather up your stories and figure out how you want to go to market with them. So that is actually my final slide. So I'll just leave you with this thought. It's about the stories that you tell. Those are the most memorable ones, and how people will remember you into the future. So.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm sure there's a few questions or comments from the room. Anybody want to ask, or did Cheryl answer every question on your mind?
Probably not.
So there was a pizza. Somebody just came for the pizza, but he's still here. It's good, Chris. Thank you for staying. You had a question in the back? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess in this age of Chat GPT, do more stories trump qualitative stories?
Could you say it slower? Qualitative stories?
Do more stories, as in the
Do more
numbers
stories as qualitative stories.
versus qualitative stories, which would be few, right? So, like, would a company which just goes out and promotes, like, let's say 50 stories versus somebody who does 5 really good stories, who wins in the end?
I think it's
I don't know.
going to come. Sorry.
I was going to say sometimes quality is better than quantity.
Well, that's the question. Is that true anymore in this day and age?
So you really need to think about who you're targeting, right? So there's many different things you need to think about with your audience. Is where do they read their content? Are they on, like, a lot of people like they think LinkedIn is the panacea, but there are many industries where people are not on LinkedIn. You know, they might be in a warehouse picking boxes. So your story might go into a publication. So, you know, volume is not necessarily going to get you where you need to go. You need to think about who's going to read my stories and where do they need to be for them to be read. So sometimes it might be an industry publication. It might be a video on YouTube or on Vimeo. I see a lot of people going to Vimeo instead of YouTube because of the distraction there. It could be on social media, could be on an industry website. So you really need to think through that too. But volume, I think where you have to safeguard against volume is you don't want to lose your authenticity and your voice just because of volume.
Good point.
Yeah, another question here. Go ahead.
Hi, Cheryl. This is Homa. So my team's very small, and there were some slides that were about talking about, you know, describing your culture on your About Us page and all that. You know, because we're small, I would say we don't necessarily have like a big group culture. And I try my best to demonstrate my values through posts on LinkedIn to, you know, make me look human, and it's not all about business. But what would you recommend for a business of my size?
And actually, so you're probably most like the clients that we serve. And we just did a kind of an About Us refresh for a small MSP based in Florida. Okay. And you're paying really careful attention to the message you're trying to get across and the words that you use. So, for example, the feedback I got from them yesterday, and I'm just going to read it to you, because words matter. They matter a lot. She said, like, we appreciate all the work being put into this. We have one line we hoping you can sharpen. And that the phrase was without the price tag. And she says, the concern is that those words are going to attract a kind of buyer who isn't a good fit for us. So you have to pay really good attention to the phrasing you use to get the message across that you want. And then all the content that you produce after that. One of my slides had something about the words. You know, make sure you're consistently using those words in everything that you do. And I think that develops your authenticity. So it comes down to, do your social media profiles reflect what you say on your About Us? do your postings up on LinkedIn or whatever, wherever you're posting, reinforce what you're saying on your About Us. You can't have a break because they might see you on YouTube before they ever come to your website. And we certainly find that with the younger buyer, they will go to social media first. They'll ask their friends, they'll read reviews. The last place they come to is your website. So you need to make sure it's cohesive across all your public properties. Otherwise, there'll be a break somewhere. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Question in the back.
The question I have is, you had mentioned earlier, I think you said like good stories, they're 22 times more memorable. Well, I've noticed that one thing that's growing right now is like videos, sending videos of yourself. Have you had any experience with that as in comparison to like emails or PDFs or just, general replies, like maybe using Microsoft Stream instead of something like that? Sending a video, any stats or tips around that?
Not stats so much as in video format. So what we're seeing right now, back in the old days, as in 2021 or 2, videos were longer, right? Now it's really I'm going to use TikTok only in terms of short, sweet, succinct video, like 30-second videos. And it might be, so what you're going to need to do is break down, like I'm going to tell my story in 30-second increments, but I'm going to do one part of it. And I'm just going to use a dynamics analogy because I live most of my day in a dynamics world. Why you should move from your QuickBooks accounting to Business Central in 30 seconds. Then it might be, well, if you're in manufacturing, you might want this other widget that we have, 30 seconds. So you kind of build a series of 30-second videos, but do not think about them as needing to be highly produced, because highly produced videos, now people almost feel like, okay, that's not the partner I want to work with because they're very polished. They have suits and ties and they have a big office or a foyer. It's more authentic if you're on camera. Maybe you should just brush your hair, but you can have like a collared shirt on and just speak, right? So you want to be really authentic, but you want to have volume 30 seconds at a time. And what's great about those is they're great for social media. You can put them out there, tee them up. You can put them on your website. They're not going to consume a lot of space. You can use them to build a YouTube channel or a Vimeo channel or even a Wistia channel, which has better tracking. So you can kind of see the effectiveness of that. And then they're also easy for your salespeople to share. So if somebody, is curious about, well, do you do sales tats? And you're like, oh, cool, I have a 30-second video of Avalera. Here you go. So they can be really useful content pieces.
So a story doesn't have to be a long story. It could be a short story and convey a message in chapters or sentences, different blocks in video. It's a good idea.
That's right. Yep.